In our last few sessions, we took a look at the very basics or fundamentals of moving around in CorelDRAW, what vector shapes are, lines and nodes, and also some of the basics of what pixels are and different raster properties of images and pixels in CorelDRAW. Off of that foundation, at this point, I'd like to start taking a look at how we move objects around in the CorelDRAW workspace and how we handle and position our graphics and objects. I'm going to keep it very basic here, but the first thing I'm going to do is just bring some objects into my workspace. I'll go ahead and go to my design base. I'm going to go to marketing tools, and the first thing I'll do is I'll just bring in this comp right here. Double click on that and we'll import or open, in a new document. Once that's open, I'll go ahead and minimize my design base, and I'll go ahead and select this, and I'm just going to go Control C to copy that. I'll minimize this. I'll open up my training page here and hit Control V. Next thing I'll do is just go ahead and get a design to work with here. So I'll go over to my templates, and I'm going to go through down here and pick out a template here to work with in this session. I think I'll go with this one here. Double click and I'll open that also in a new document. Go ahead and minimize. I'll update my text here and I'll go ahead and close that. Go ahead and lasso this, and I'll just hit Control C to copy. Go ahead and minimize this also. Go back to my training page and hit Control V. So I've got a couple of assets to work with here for setting up perhaps some marketing material or something like that. If I wanted to, I could go change the names and team name and things like that for this and set it up for a sports marketing template and send it off to a coach or what have you. And we'll take a look at that here in just a minute. The first thing I'll do is just go over the very basics of working with objects in Draw. Go ahead and create a simple rectangle. Just left click, drag, and there we've got a basic rectangle. I'm going to fill that with the color green. And we're going to take a look at how we manipulate and move and change the size of and scale and position our objects in CorelDRAW. You'll notice that my rectangle has some black rectangles around the outside, and I refer to these as being handles. But you'll notice that if I left click, hold down, and start to move that down, I'll scale my rectangle. If I come to either the left or the right side here, the right for example, left click and hold, I can change the width of my rectangle. If I go to the top or the bottom, I can change the height of my rectangle. Now with this selected, if I click it again, you'll notice that these handles change. Now I have rotation and skew. One thing you want to be aware of is that as you go through different things and objects and tools in Draw, you have a hints docker over here that will give you information about rotating and skewing your objects. You'll notice that I can come over here, left click in the top right hand corner, start to move that, and I'm going to rotate my object. I'll hit Control Z. You'll notice also that if I come here on the right hand side or the left hand side with the arrow handles, left click and hold, I can skew my object. I'll hit Control Z. You'll notice also that there's a center point here, and you can move that. You can left click, hold down, drag that to a different position, and then the axis of your rotation is going to change, or the center point of that rotation, and that's the same for your skewing. It's different when we've moved the center point. You can also notice that if I hold down Control, I'll start to be constrained in my increments of rotation. I use that quite frequently. Let's say I've got something set up horizontally and I want to change it to vertical. I'll constrain to do that, so I'll get an exact rotation and I won't have to try and eyeball it so that my lines and graphics stay straight. Now that we've seen how to manipulate the size and rotate our objects, what I want to do is take a look at selecting objects, and we'll go ahead and change this to pretty much a square, and I'll duplicate this. Left click, hold down, right click one time, and that's duplicated. Left click, hold down, right click one time, release the left mouse button, and that's been duplicated. Do this one more time, here, and then we'll go ahead and change our colors. Got that selected, come over here and left click on a red, left click on a blue, and we'll come here and left click on a yellow. Now I have 4 rectangle objects set up in my Corel Draw workspace. And the way I can select these, not just one at a time, but also multiple objects at the same time, is quite simple. I can just go ahead and lasso everything, and now I've got 4 objects selected. Or I can select an object by holding down Shift after I've selected an original object, and I can select multiple objects. And I've got all 4 objects selected. I can also deselect by holding down Shift. Now I'm down to 3 objects, or I could lasso an object holding down Shift and it would be selected. Now I only have 2 objects selected. And that's how I typically handle my selection of objects. There's one more function or feature I want to take a look at relating to selecting objects. I'm going to go ahead and select all of these, and I'm going to hit C and E. Now I know I have this object here, but behind that are 3 other objects. If I hold down Alt and click, I know that I've selected an object with a blue fill because the status bar is telling me down here on the right. If I come to the X in the center of that, select that and pull it, I can pull it out even though it's behind the red. But if I do not click on, I want to hit Control Z, the X, I'll select the red object. So once again, that's hold down Alt, click. If you want to move the object behind you, have to select the X in the center. Left click, hold down, and move. Sometimes I like to select multiple objects behind an object, and I can do that if I click on here holding down Shift and Alt. I've got the blue selected. Now I have 2 objects selected, and I would bring these out and I could move them out, and you could see what I had selected was the blue and the yellow object, even though one object was behind the other. I'll hit Control Z here. Now if I want to move the red object, and we'll go ahead and bring these back apart again now. If I want to change their position relative to the way they're layered on top of each other, there's a couple of different ways we can do that. Let's say I want the yellow in front of the blue. I can right click on that and select Order, go to in front of, and we can't see that, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll up so we can see that in the workspace. Right click, select Order, go to in front of, and click on the blue, and that'll move that up in order. Let's say I want the red behind the green. Right click, Order, behind, right here, as you can see. Now I do a lot of work with my right mouse button. I'm focusing on my design work, and I don't use a lot of the shortcuts. I use them a lot, but I don't use as many as I can. You can see them listed out in the Draw workspace here. Shift page up, Shift page down. Now if I want to send this to the back of the page, I can hold down Shift and go to page down, and that will send that to the back of page. So now that we know how to select our objects and work with them, let's take a look at one other thing here. I've got my graphic set up here, and I've got my design. I want to bring this out and put it behind my t-shirt. Well, I can also go to my Object Manager Docker, and if you don't see that, you'll see it here. You can go to Window, Dockers, and check on Object Manager. It'll be there, and you can of course expand or collapse these Dockers. Now I can see that I've got a group of 14 objects, but I've also got this grayscale here that I want to put this behind. Now I could simply go right click on this, go Order, and come down and click on Behind, and I'll bring that up in the workspace so you can see this. Right click, Order, Behind, and click on my gray t-shirt, and then just simply left click and move this here into my design and resize it to go in with my marketing material. And we'll zoom in here, and we can see that this is actually behind the shadow. Now once I've got this behind the shadow, if I want to select it and work with it, I'm obviously going to need to use Alt functionality so that I can manage and tweak this. And obviously I'm grabbing off the center point of the object, because if I grab off in here, I'm going to get the shading. Hit Control Z, hold down Alt, click on my graphic, go to the center point, bring it off here to one size, and then I can resize that. Now I'm working through several objects set up on top of each other. I've got my gray here. I'm going to hold down Alt. Now I know I've got the t-shirt selected. I'm going to change this to a gray t-shirt, and now I've got a gray t-shirt with a different color that seems to work better with that design. Now let's say I'll hold down Alt and I click off, click on my shading, hold down Alt and select the graphic. I'm going to right click on that and select. Now see, when that happened I lost the X because it's not going to work for a right click, it only works for a left click. So I'm going to hit Alt again, I'm going to go to Shift and I'm going to go to Page Down and send that to the back of the page. Now I've got a group of 14 objects here in my Object Manager, Docker. And I can see that I've got the grayscale shades up here at the top. Well, if I want to bring this up, I can simply left click on this and just drag it right up under Shades. And then it will be behind my shaded object going through the Object Manager. Now what you want to be aware of with this Object Manager, you get a lot of information relating to your graphic. What is it? You've got layer 4 here, you've got a bitmap here, and these are all different objects in your work environment. You can see what we just selected was a bitmap over here actually. So working with the Object Manager, we get quite a bit of information about our graphics, where they are on our page, and we can also use that to manipulate and move our objects around in our workspace. Also notice that we can see a group of 14 objects here in our Object Manager, and we can see a group of 3 objects here, and I can click on this and that will select those objects even though they're in that group. And you can see I just selected part of that design that's in that group, and even though it's grouped, I can still manipulate that and move it around coming off of the center point. If I move that, I'm moving this group of 3 objects even though it's in this group of this design. I'm going to hit Control Z, and what I want to do is go ahead and move this graphic out and just take a look at selecting objects in a group, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. I'm going to bring this out and duplicate it here. Now I've got a group here of 14 objects, but if I hold down Control in my group, I just selected some of the objects that are in the actual group, and I could move those, and then when I click off you can see that I still have a group. And if I move this around, they're still in the group. I'm going to hit Control Z and go back. Now what is a group of objects? A group of objects is when you take a number of objects and you put them into a group so that they become one object, as this design is here. If I take 3 rectangles, fill this one with blue, fill this one with red, fill that with one with yellow, and then I take these and lasso them, and I come up here and I select group. Now these are treated as one object in Draw. I can move them around and resize them, and they'll be like they are together. If I ungroup them, clicking up in the properties bar, they will become independent again. But if I have them grouped and I want to select one of them, I can hold down Control and I'll select one object in the group. Now we can look at this design. You see we've got a group of 14 objects, but if we ungroup, we can see we've got 14 objects selected on layer 1, but many of these are actually groups. So they're groups within groups. And if I hold down Control and click here, I'll select that group of objects, which is actually 3 objects, and I could hold down Control again and go even deeper. So we'll go ahead and wrap here, but this is just an introduction on how to select, change the size, move objects around, position them, and set them up in your workspace based on what size you want them to be and where you want to have them in relation to other graphics layered on top of each other. We'll go ahead and wrap here, and we'll continue in our next session.